help us to tune everything else out and just focus on your word. Be with Lester and be with all our body as we come together and study your word. So we ask this in Jesus' name.
Amen. Turn to Acts chapter 2.
I wondered how far you've gone, that far.
No, I'm doing snail's pace.
I figured, that's
We're doing
okay.
snail's pace. And
I
we'll
was
take-
trying to study along with y'all, but I didn't know how far.
And we will take some rabbit holes, possibly one this morning.
I always call
It's
it
it's like a soap opera. When I was working summers way before, well, way early in college life, when summer had off, summer job, I'd catch a soap opera now and then. I thought, man, I've got to. Well, you know, when you go see a soap opera, you see it, 2 months ago, you watch it today, it ain't changed any. You know, so this is kind of the soap opera method of studying Acts. But anyway, okay. I'd always heard that about soap opera. I said, you gotta be kidding. It is true.
You're right.
Acts is what we'll be studying. And there is a picture showing what Acts is. You got an axe, chopped up a tree to form a church, and that's the basic principle behind the book of Acts. So we'll look at it from a first century point of view, from a Jewish and Gentile perspective. It's a literary bridge between the Gospels and Epistles. Picks up where the Gospels left off, and provides background in historical, geographical, and cultural information. Imagine if you didn't have Acts, you'd have some questions about who Paul is, how the church gets started. Because when you go from the Old Testament to the Gospels, you see something different. You see synagogue. Well, synagogue's never mentioned in the Old Testament because the teachings were done there. Synagogue happened during the exile. So when that carried over into the Gospels, and then so you had the 4 Gospels, then all of a sudden you got a new concept coming up, and that's called the church. So anyway, so in Acts chapter 2, let's read 1 and 2, and we'll probably only do verse 1, probably only half of that today. So I want to give some background. So if somebody can read Acts chapter 2, 1 and 2.
The day of Pentecost, all the believers were meeting together in one place. Suddenly there was a sound from heaven like the roaring of a mighty windstorm, and it filled the house where they were sitting.
Okay. We'll talk more about the wind, and it is not a York peppermint patty moment. It is not that. You heard, you didn't feel it like that. More of that next week. So when the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And what I wanted to do was kind of step back and see, how'd you get to Pentecost? And so it's a feast mention. So I want to look at that. So the day of Pentecost says one place, saw a noise from heaven and filled the house. So we're going to look at some background information on feast. And I know we've done a lot on feast, but I'm kind of going to lay this groundwork where we'll have some common ground to go up from and not take for granted that you have that understanding. Not that this group would, but and patterns that God sets up. I'll show you something that you might be aware of, you might not be aware of. And then location. More of that next week. So like I said, some of this will be a review, some possibly not. But like I said, I want to build a common ground of where we will go from here. Okay, now, Pentecost. Pentecost, one of the feasts. And so, how do you get to Pentecost? How do you figure out when Pentecost is? When's Christmas?
December 25th.
When's, I'm going to say it one time, Easter. That's the last time I'll say it. When's Resurrection Day?
It varies, yeah.
You mean Christ rose here on this day, then he rose? No. But Resurrection Day floats around. When's Christmas?
December 25th.
When's the New Year's Day?
January 1st.
When's Thanksgiving?
It moves.
It moves.
It's always on the, yeah, because it.
Becca's birthday.
Yeah, they do it like on
Yeah.
Thursday.
On Thursday. Okay. But Resurrection Day moves.
It's always on Sunday.
And have you ever wondered why?
First, the new.
Have you ever wondered why Resurrection Day moves?
I can always just remember my grandfather said it was based on the moon.
Okay.
And that's what he
Okay.
always told me.
So-
Now, he didn't know a whole lot more, he just knew that.
There we have our 4 seasons. There, okay? Now, God's the one that did this. This is astronomy, not astrology. Astronomy, I have to make sure I get that right. Okay. So there we have the 4 seasons. Sounds like a music group. Okay, so you have the sun in the middle, and the earth rotates around. We all know that, okay? But the Jews, well, let's say Jews, God says, I don't want you paying attention to the sun, I want you paying attention to the moon. So they do their calendar by the moon. Not that the earth rotates around the moon, but it dictates when the Jews decide their time. Who set that? God set that. Do you wonder how God says, do this, we go way over here and do this? Okay, just throwing that out. Okay, so you got the 4 seasons, and the Israel, the Hebrews, determined their calendar by the moon. Okay, so starting over there at summer solstice, equinox, summer solstice, you have the longest day of the year. Now when I was growing up, oh, it's the longest day of the year, oh, it's the longest day. I'm going, oh, it's 25 hours or whatever? No, it's still 24 hours. But you have more daylight. I remember one time, June 21st, was at the Walmart up there outside Fayetteville, walking out, just kind of up on that plateau there. Man, at 9 o'clock, 9:30 at night, man, it was still daylight. And I go, oh, summer solstice, the longest day of the year. In other words, you got 24 hours, you got this much daylight, that much dark. Now, in the Jewish term, just to let you know, they had, quote, unquote, 24 hours. They had 12 hours a day, 12 hours a night, no matter if you had 15 hours a day and 9 hours. Their hours were, daylight was always 12. Nighttime was always 12, just as a reference. Okay, so as we move along to the autumn, to the fall solstice, daylight equals nighttime. Okay? Then after that, you're going into winter, you got the shortest day of the year. The days, there's no daylight. It's nighttime, just seems to go forever. If you work midnights, and if you work shift work and you're on midnights, and you're on night, you go to work when it's dark, you wake up when it's dark.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, and that can wear on you. When I did shift work, it can wear on me. Okay, so now, after that shortest day of the year, the days start getting longer. Right now, we are past the winter equinox, solstice. So that means our days are getting longer. About a minute and a half every day, 2 days, something like that. So then you come to spring equinox, when daylight equals night. We're back where that's at. And the Jews had this down pat. They had their little clocks, and they had watchers on top of the temple, watching when the sun would do this and do that and all, and they would time it and all. The enemies of Israel back in the day, when they know that the sun was going to rise up over this hill, the enemies would build bonfires to imitate that the sun was rising or the moon was rising. try to fake them out on the calendar. So nowadays, all we gotta do is just Google it. Okay, so that's how the solstices. Okay. Now, there, I've got listed in red going around the months that are on the Jewish calendar. There's 12 of them. But you got to understand that in the Jewish calendar, based on the moon cycles around every 28 days. Give or take a few hours. Okay? So when you go from 28 days up to 30, 31, you get a problem on the calendars. Our calendar and the Jewish calendar are kind of doing this number. So every 7 years or 8 years, whatever, they add a second, that 12th month down there, Adar, they add Adar 2. So if you ever see that, it's Adar 2. So you add another month to compensate for their short months.
Just like we do every 4 years, we have a leap year.
Yeah, we have a leap year.
Yeah, so-
Instead of leap day, they have a leap month, per se. Okay, so their calendar started right there, the spring equinox, Nisan, and you thought that was a car. So you got Nisan. Okay, so in Exodus 12, God says, this is going to be your calendar. And then he starts giving them a new calendar. The reason for that is God created 7-day week. Egypt was on a 10-day week. God says, that's not the way I created it. We're going back to what I did. That's one reason.
They went by the sun.
They went by the sun. So, there you got Nisan. It's first of the month, or first month. Like I said, in Exodus 12, Passover, the first feast, the first appointed time of God is the first full moon after the spring equinox. So when daylight and dark, time-wise, are the same, usually around March 21st or so, when it's there, the first full moon after that is Passover. That's how you determine when Passover is. Okay? That's why it changes. That's why it's not on the set day. Up there, where I got the red star, Tishri, that is the 7th month. That is when the second set of the feasts happen. Okay. So in Exodus 12 and 13, also Leviticus 23, we're going to have a little exercise here. Stay seated. We're going to have a little exercise here. So Nisan 10, you can see this in Exodus 12. God says on Nisan the 10th, you're going to choose a lamb. Okay? On the 14th, you're going to kill that lamb. And then the next Sabbath is going to be unleavened bread. And the next day, which is always a Sunday, will be first fruits. Unleavened bread is always on the Sabbath, Saturday. First fruits, Resurrection Day, is always on the Sunday. Okay? Now, I've got a golden calendar there. Let's do a little exercise. Let's fill it in. And let's let that last Shabbat get there. Okay, let's do a little exercise. Okay. The 10th, Lamb Selection Day, 14th Passover, unleavened bread, the next Sabbath, Shabbat, and then Good Friday, or I mean, Resurrection Day, okay? First fruits. Okay, say the 10th is on that day. No, don't want to do that one yet. Strike that back. Say the 10th is on that day. Lamb Selection Day, which we call triumphal entry. Bible doesn't do that. I won't use that term again. It's always Lamb Selection Day. Okay. Lamb Selection Day is the 10th. When is Passover?
On the 14th?
10, 11, 12, 13, 14th. Right there. Passover's then. Okay? When is unleavened bread?
On that Saturday.
When is first fruits?
The next day.
Next day.
Next day right there. Okay? Wonder if Passover, or excuse me, Lamb Selection Day is that day. When is Passover?
Wednesday.
10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Passover moon. Passover moon. Next Sabbath, unleavened bread is that day. When is Resurrection Day, first fruits.
Sunday, the next day.
That's why Easter, that's why Resurrection Day moves. Okay? Wait a minute. Jesus was killed on Passover, buried on the unleavened. Next day is first fruits. Okay? So, if that is Lamb Selection Day, 10,
Friday.
11, 12, 13, that would be Passover. And I'm not, now, Jews start their day at sunset. Okay, I understand that. So that would be Passover, unleavened bread that day, Resurrection Day that day.
And that's how we celebrate it every year.
That's how we celebrate it every year. Does it fall on the actual dates? No. Chances are it doesn't. But no big deal. But yeah,
Every
like
so
once
often.
every 7 or 8 years, that does happen. So that's the background on how those are decided.
Just like Becca's birthdays, once every 7 years, it's gonna be on Thursday, Thanksgiving. That's the way, you know, but
Okay. So, entry, Jesus went in on Lamb Selection Day. That is when Jesus entered Jerusalem that day, that is the very first time he publicly declared his ministry. It's the first time. When you understand what's going on, it makes a lot of sense. Because God says, this is when you choose your lamb. And Jesus is saying, choose me! He's going to kill that lamb. Then he's going to bury it. Then resurrect it. And when the day of Pentecost has come, they were all together in one place. So that's how we get to Pentecost, or how we get to start to get to Pentecost. what leads up to Pentecost from a Lord's appointed view time. So I want to, got another chart here. Now, one thing to do when you look at this, we feast, you might think they are Jewish feasts. No, they are not Jewish feasts. God says, when he starts out in Leviticus 20 through, he says, these are the Lord's appointed times. They're not just for Jews, they're for people. Not just for the Jewish nation. They're the Lord's appointed times. That's an important note to make. Okay, so let's fill this in. Lord's appointed times. And how many feasts are there?
7.
7. Sure about that? Positive. Ones that are mentioned. Let's see if... Had to. Okay. So, yes, 7 feasts to start with. Yes, there's other ones. Purim. There's the 8th day that sometimes it's looped in with tabernacles and other ones. But these are the 7 basic appointed times. The first 4 are in the spring, and the last 4 are in the fall. Last 3, thank you. Okay. So, up there I'm going to have the name that we commonly go by, the Hebrew name, when it is, and how does God interact in those feasts. So, what feast are we talking about now? What was read in Acts chapter 1? Pentecost. Which one is Pentecost?
It's the last of the spring feasts, number 4.
Number 4. Do I hear number 3? Do I hear number 5? Number 4. Pentecost. It didn't hop in there. Okay. The first one is Passover. Then we have unleavened bread. Then we have first fruits. So that is the 4 feasts in springtime. And they correspond with the agricultural season. So next you have trumpets. Then you have Day of Atonement. And then you have the tabernacles, which is 7 days plus 1, so it's the 8th day. When you read in John chapter 8, I believe, where it says, and on that last day, on that great day, when Jesus stood up and said, you know, I will give you living water, that was in Tabernacles, the 8th day. What's good about this, when you understand God's appointed times, you can understand a time flow in the Gospels. And if it's Tabernacles, you know where Jesus is going to be. If it's Passover, you know where Jesus is going to be. If it's Pentecost, you know where Jesus is going to be. It's going to be interesting. Those were the 3 pilgrims. Okay. Passover, the Hebrew name, Pesach. Hamotzot is unleavened bread. Yom HaBikurim is first fruits. Pentecost is called Shavuot. Trumpets, usually we call that Rosh Hashanah. I'm going to go away from that because nothing wrong with it, but I'm going to go back to what God called it to start with. Rosh Hashanah came about in the Babylonian exile. The names of the months came along in the Babylonian exile. So I'm doing away with Rosh Hashanah and Ta'aruah, which is the blowing of sound. Trumpets is implied in that. Yom Kippur and then Sukkot, which is the Hebrew name for tabernacles. When? We've already discussed some of that. First full moon after the spring solstice. Now you know how you determine Passover. Unleavened bread will be the next Shabbat, next Saturday. First fruits will be the following Sunday, immediately. You always have unleavened bread and first fruits, bang, bang. From the first fruits to Pentecost, they do what is called counting the Omer. So Acts chapter 1 is all in counting the Omer. Now, school teacher. Did the kids ever count down to the last day of school?
Oh, yeah.
So we do too.
Why?
I am the first one.
Why?
Because we need that rest.
Okay. And if you've grown up kids, do your kids ever say, Mommy, Daddy, how long we got till my birthday? How long we got to Christmas? They do that. That's what counting the Omer is. God says, count down the Omer, because at the end of 50 days, I'm going to give you something. It's an expectation to prepare yourself for what God's going to give you. That's what counting the Omer is. And that starts at the first fruits. God says count 7 Sabbaths, 7 weeks. Shavuot means weeks. Pentecost means 5, I believe. And I forget why they call it that. It escapes me right now. Okay. So now, then you would have Pentecost. Then you would have the first day of the 7th month, which is after the fall solstice. 10 days after that, you have Yom Kippur. And then 5 days after that, you have Sukkot. And Sukkot lasts for, I'll say, 8 days. So that is the feast cycle. God's appointed times. God works around that. Okay? As we talked earlier, God uses His appointed time schedule that He created, that He chose to do. He says, this is when my son is going to be the sacrifice, Passover. He's going to be buried on unleavened bread. Now this happens Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Boom, 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 boom. And you can see, like I said, you can see how that went. You're going to raise on first fruits, resurrection. Now you got 50 days. You got Pentecost. Pentecost first happens way back in Exodus. It's not anything new to the Jews. So, their anticipation of what God's going to do, boom. There you go. The Holy Spirit was given. Okay. Now you can really step in it now. Step in a quagmire. What's God going to do on this? He's 4 for 4 now. Is this when He comes back? I don't know. It's God's choice. But He's got a pattern going.
We've seen the first 4 of the feast already fulfilled through Jesus. We're at that point of the fall feast, the 3 that are yet to come.
Now you go, well, Jesus says, you're not going to know that day and hour. I agree 100%. This is a 10-day period. Then what we saw in Acts, where Jesus says you're not going to know the epochs of the season, He's not saying you're not going to know whether it's fall. He's not saying that. He says you're not going to know whether it's a short time going to come or a long time going to come. Listen to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15. Behold, I tell you a mystery. You shall not sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. Does it happen during the Feast of Trumpet or that time? I don't know. It could very well happen that time. This is just my personal opinion. It's going to happen sometime that time. What year? Don't know. Be saying prepare.
We definitely know it's the end time. Those
Yeah.
3 last
Yeah.
feasts are the second time.
Yeah, yeah. That God does patterns for you and I to know.
Places keep looking, keep
Yeah.
watching.
So, like I say, can he come then? It's his choice. But every biblical indication is yes. Day and hour, that's a 10-day period right there. And then Day of Atonement, don't know. Sukkot, don't know. So, take it for what it's worth. If John Brown was here, he would ask me afterwards, did you say Jesus coming back on Feast of Trumpets? I would say, no, John. John would ask me something totally different. Totally, if I'd say this, he'd say, did you say this? No, John. I don't know if he was playing with me or if he was just didn't catch what I said. I don't know. But that's why I do that. John got me on that several times. Okay. Let me show you a pattern here. In Exodus 12 and through 19, talks about lamb selection. You're going to choose this lamb, which we talked about. 5 days after that, it says you're going to have Passover time. 40 days after that, Moses ascended Mount Sinai. When they left Egypt, they traveled 40 days Mount Sinai. Moses goes up. Okay. Now we get to an interesting part. On the 10-day and the Pentecost period. If you read the Exodus account in chapter 24, it says Moses was up on the mountain for 40 days. Okay, no problem there. Then the golden calf episode is after that. That's the way it reads in English. In the Hebrew, it's got the 40 days where Moses gets the revelation from God. The golden calf episode is written in a way that it is inserted back into that 40-day period. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, it does not come across in English. In the Hebrew, it does. Now, whether that's true or not, I'm just throwing that out. But it's a very God thing, and you'll see it next, that it was a 10-day period, and Moses is up there getting 10 commandments. God says, Moses, you got a problem down there. You need to go. Time to go down. Moses goes down, breaks all 10 commandments all at once, goes back up, continues that 40-day period. That's how it's written in the Hebrew, for what it's worth. And how many people died at the golden calf episode? 3,000. Move forward to Jesus' time in his life. You had Lamb Selection Day. Then you got Passover. Then you have 40 days Jesus ascends to heaven. And then 10 days you got Pentecost, human spirit. How many people are saved during Pentecost? 3,000. God repeats the pattern. God is saying, and God wants you to know this because He puts it out there. God follows patterns because He wants you to know what He's doing. Now, how He works that out is His business. But He says, these are my appointed time. I work around my schedule. And here it is.
Well, that's why when you read something, you look at it and say, okay, it's on an agricultural time and feast time. Wonder when that time was that this happened or that happened, or, oh, did something else happen during that time? And, you know, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but it's interesting to see what He's doing. Did you explain why it said 5 day there instead of 4 when you count?
Because
Of the way they do that He
the
did.
way they do,
split up their day and night.
they split it up evening to evening to the next day. Depends on how you want to slice that out. That's why I do the 5 days there.
So,
Okay, so Pentecost, 50 days after first fruits. You tell or you ask God anticipation, excitement for His law coming. And Jesus read, and Jews read, in Jesus' day they read from Leviticus, Ruth, Ezekiel, and Exodus. From the Temple Mount, over 2 million people, or 2 million people in attendance there. Jerusalem was crowded. So I got where are the disciples. I'm going to skip that. We'll talk about that next week. I'm going to close on this because I don't have near enough time to cover the next part. But Psalms 67 is a Pentecost Psalms. Be gracious to us and bless us, cause His face to shine upon us. Kind of sounds like Aaron's prayer, Aaron's priestly prayer. That thy way may be known to the earth, thy salvation among all nations. Notice, this is Psalms, this is Old Testament stuff. This isn't just for Jews, it's for all people. Thy salvation among all nations. Let the peoples praise Thee, O God. Let the peoples praise Thee. Let the nations be glad and sing for joy, for Thou wilt judge the peoples with uprightness. Not just the Jews, but it's all peoples. And the guide the nations on the earth. Let the peoples praise Thee, O God. Let all peoples praise Thee. The earth has yielded its produce. Pentecost was an agricultural feast. God, our God blesses us. God blesses us that all the earth, all the ends of the earth may fear Him. That's a Pentecost Psalms. Don't know who that author was. So when the day of Pentecost had come, we're all together in one place. Next week we'll talk about all in one place. And I've shared that, but I'm going to give a little bit more details into that. So we will be at the temple site on the south side. On the south side, waiting for the morning, and the disciples were waiting for the morning sacrifices to begin. And we know that because the Bible, Peter tells you that. Okay. Any question? Everybody knows when Passover starts now and understands why it flops around. Did you know that? That it was the first full moon after the spring solstice? Did you know that? That's how you determine. That's how you determine. Okay, let's close. Heavenly Father, thank you for you. Thank you for your word. Thank you for how you give us all this stuff where we can understand more about you, about the way that you work. And for all the details we know because of your love and mercy and grace to us. Father, you work in ways beyond our comprehension, but you work within what you have set for yourself. Thank you for you. Thank you for your word. Thank you for this body of believers. All may we love, may we cherish you in your precious name. Amen.